Hello. This video on demand will talk about classifying atoms within a molecule and then basically classifying the whole molecule based on the classification of certain atoms within the molecule. Now there are four basic classifications as listed here: primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. Primary is sometimes symbolized as 1 degree, but it's pronounced primary, 2 degree, secondary, and so on. Are classified by the number of other carbons attached. So this molecule, we will classify all of these different carbons, and each one has its own classification. This kind of carbon is considered to be primary. Why? Because it's attached to just one other carbon. This carbon is primary because it's attached to that one other carbon. Are there any other primary carbons in this molecule? Certainly. This carbon is primary because it's attached to one other. This carbon is primary because it's attached to one other. So is this one, because it's attached to one other. Now, are there any other primary carbons in this molecule? So far, the primary carbons we've looked at were all CH3 groups. But notice, this is also a primary carbon, even though it's a CH2 group, and that's because it is attached to just one other carbon, being this carbon right here. The fact that it's also attached to an oxygen doesn't change the fact that it's primary. Now, are there any secondary carbons in this molecule? That is, carbons that are attached to two other carbons. Yep, this carbon is attached to two others, and this carbon is attached to two others. So the CH2 and this CH2 are both secondary carbons. Are there any tertiary carbons in this molecule? That is, carbons attached to three other carbons. Certainly, this one is attached to that one, and that one. So this is a tertiary carbon. And finally, are there any quaternary carbons in this molecule? I think you'll agree that one is quaternary because it's attached to four other carbons. So pretty simple idea. Primaries are attached to one carbon and so on. Now, how do we classify hydrogens within molecules? Well, they're classified by the classification of the carbon they're attached to, because of course hydrogens are always attached to only one other atom. So we'll classify them based on the carbon they're attached to. So these three are primary hydrogens because they're attached to a primary carbon. These three are also primary because this is a primary carbon. These hydrogens are primary because that's a primary carbon, and so on. Notice these hydrogens are also primary because they're attached to a primary carbon. What kind of hydrogens are these? These two hydrogens and these two hydrogens. Well, these would be secondary because the carbons they're attached to are secondary, being attached to two other carbons. What kind of hydrogen is this? All by itself, unique among all the rest of the hydrogens here. That's tertiary, and that's because it's on a carbon with three other carbons. Are there any quaternary hydrogens in this molecule? The answer is clearly no. Are quaternary hydrogens even possible? Well, there's a quaternary carbon, but of course if a quaternary carbon has four other carbons attached to it, by definition it can't have any hydrogens, and therefore there are no quaternary hydrogens. Now, other atoms are also classified by the classification of the carbon they are attached to. So this oxygen, in fact this whole OH group, is considered to be primary because the carbon it's attached to is primary. So this oxygen, this OH group, is a primary oxygen. Now, the whole molecule is classified by the carbon the functional group is attached to. So if you look carefully at this molecule, you'll see because it has an OH group, it's an alcohol. Because the OH group functional group is what makes it an alcohol, the whole molecule is considered to be a primary alcohol. However, as promised at the beginning, amines are classified differently. Amines are classified by the number of carbons attached to the nitrogen, not to any particular carbon. Or let me ask you, what kind of amine is this? Well, the carbon is certainly tertiary because it has three other carbons attached to it, but we're going to classify this amine as a primary amine because the nitrogen itself only has one other carbon attached. What kind of amine is this? Well, it has three carbons attached to the nitrogen, so it's called a tertiary amine, even though these carbons are certainly not tertiary carbons. Again, it's the classification, or it's the number of carbons attached to the nitrogen that matter. And what kind of amine is this? Well, looking carefully, this is a little complicated. Notice that here's the nitrogen, and how many carbons does it have attached to it? One over here and one over here. So it has two carbons attached to it. Doesn't matter what kind of carbons they are, doesn't matter how big the carbon group is. What matters is that the number of carbons attached is 2, and therefore this is a secondary amine. Thank you for your attention.